guys, today's video is a video idea that I stole from my friend Angelica. If you guys are not subscribed to Angelica, I will link her channel down below, but I saw her do a video like this about a week ago when I'm filming this now about palettes that she almost bought in 2020. And when I was watching her list, I was like, I have so many palettes that I was this close to buying this year, and I just want to tell you all about them and maybe why I didn't buy them as well, because a lot of these are still kind of palettes that are on my mind and palettes that I kind of wish that I bought, but as a review channel, it's kind of just too late now. And it's just a rule that I have for myself. I know I've said that many times in the past, but I don't go back and buy older palettes because honestly, I need to spend my money on the new palettes. I don't want to spend money on older palettes because I'm not going to get my money's worth from the video that I do make with them to really warrant me buying older palettes that I just don't have time to use that much. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So let's go ahead and get into the list of palettes that I almost bought in 2020. So the first palette is one that I actually tried to buy, and this is the Stacey Marie and Be Perfect Carnival palette, the last palette that they came out with. Is that called the Carnival palette? That might be a different one. That might be their first one, but I'll have pictures on the screen. But this is the one that I came out with this year, and I really wanted to try this brand. I really wanted to get this palette, but for some reason there was some mishap with the launch where you had to sign up for like email notifications, otherwise you wouldn't be able to access the site, and I somehow didn't get an email to ever sign up for notifications. And when the launch day came, I went on their site and they put me in a queue, and when I got to the front of the queue, I wasn't able to actually access the launch because I wasn't signed up for their emails or something. I don't know, it was a whole deal. Like, I feel like that launch was kind of a train wreck, and by the time I got to the end of the line and I wasn't able to buy it and it sold out, I was like, you know what, whatever. Like, I'm not gonna waste my time on this. I really wanted this palette, but when I missed it on the launch day, I'm not gonna go back and buy it. I'm just not going to do that. And I was just really annoyed because I really wanted to get that palette, and then the launch was just, it was just such a bad experience. So I never ended up picking that up, but I've seen nothing but good reviews and I know that people love that palette. So I'm still a little bummed that I wasn't able to get my hands on it, but it is what it is. You know, there's always going to be new palettes coming out, and I will have plenty of new palettes to dig my little brushes into, and I'll have a good time with those instead. And so I do regret not buying it, but on the other hand, it's like kind of their own fault that I wasn't able to buy it. The next palette is a palette that I almost just wanted to buy for the packaging, and this is the ColourPop, I think it's called the Garden Variety palette, the one that had all of the flowers on the outside. I have so many times when I've been on ColourPop's website after that launch, I've been this close to buying it because in my mind I'm like, maybe I can depot that palette and then use all of my little ColourPop single shadows that I've depotted from my other palettes and make my own little Garden Variety palette, and just it'll be a good old time. But I'm also like, Annette, you know you're never going to use it even if you do it. It'll be fun doing it, but you're not gonna have time to use it. And the color story in that palette just wasn't really up my alley, but the packaging was so beautiful. When I'm telling you I've been this close to buying that palette so many times ever since it came out, I'm not kidding. Like, I've had it in my cart on ColourPop so many times when they've had other things launched, but I've taken it out last minute because I'm like, Annette, you're not gonna use it. Don't spend your money on it. I wish they would come out with magnetic palettes with that packaging. Holy crap, I would buy like 10 of them because that is the most beautiful packaging that I have ever seen on any of the ColourPop palettes. I think it's just beautiful. The next palette that I was this close to buying is the Nikkie Tutorials and Beauty Bay collab palette. The one thing, this is so petty, but the one thing that stopped me from buying that palette is the packaging, because I can't stand packagings that is not very practical, and I hate the fact that it kind of like flips out in the middle. It's just so annoying. Like, I just want a palette that I can, you know, because it's the same size as the M.M. Mitchell palette that I just filmed with. Like, it's the same size as this, and then you have to like open this one and then open this one, and as a YouTuber, how am I supposed to hold that up to the camera and show what I'm doing? Like, it's just a pain in the ass. I just want a palette that can be flipped around. Like, is that too much to ask for? I get the idea behind it. I get that she wanted it to be different, but it's just so impractical, and is honestly the one reason why I didn't buy it. I just didn't want to have to deal with it. I'm sorry, I told you, it's very petty, but I was this close though. I really did like the color story of it, and I really wanted to support Nikkie, and I really wanted to try Beauty Bay's own brand, but the packaging, it just wasn't it. Oh my god, the next palette that I was this close to buying. You guys are gonna laugh because this is so stupid, but this is the Pumpkin Spice palette from Too Faced. Why? You're asking yourself, why, Annette? Why did you want to buy the pumpkin spice palette? Well, let me tell you, I'm a sucker for scented makeup. I'm a sucker for anything that smells sweet. I love anything pumpkin, and honestly, the color story of that palette was quite nice as well. But it's also Too Faced, and I just know the Too Faced formula is just not going to blow me away, you know, because I have so many amazing indie brands, especially when it comes to their shimmers. I just don't think that Too Faced is going to like wow me. So I was like, you know what, it could make for a good review, possibly, maybe, but I'm gonna stay strong this time. It's also a limited edition palette. I don't need it. So I decided not to buy it, but I'm still just like, I wonder what it smells like. I just want to smell the palette. Maybe next year when they come out with something else, I'll end up buying it, but I stayed strong this year and I didn't pick it up, and I wouldn't say I regret it. The next palette that I almost bought is a palette from Ace Beauté, and this is their Nostalgia palette. I think this is their newest palette. I'm pretty sure it is. When I first saw it, I wasn't like super blown away by the color story, but Ace Beauté is one of those brands that just, I don't know, I feel like their aesthetic is very much me, and I really want to buy more from the brand. I do have their Oceanic palette, and I do like it. I don't love the shimmers in it as much as some other shimmers that I have in my collection. They're fine, but just not my favorites. I think I like their mattes a little bit more than their shimmers. In the moment, I think the reason why I didn't end up picking this up, even though I was very, very close, is just because it has a lot of like orangey warm toned shades, and I don't really use those that often. Like, yeah, there's a pop of teal and a pop of purple which look really, really nice, but like 2/3 of this palette is just like very warm and orangey, and I'm not really all about that orangey life. It's not that I don't like oranges, like I quite like oranges when I do use them, but they're just not my preferred color, if that makes sense. So I don't know, I'm still like on the fence. Like, I still kind of want this palette, and I think that maybe if this palette had come out like in a month from now, maybe I would buy it. I'm not really sure, but I still really, really want that palette, but I'm not going to buy it. Like I said, I'm just not going to buy older palettes unless like some kind of opportunity comes up where, you know, I get it for free somehow, or, you know, whatever it is. Like, I'm just not going to spend my money on this right now, but it is a beautiful palette still, and I'm still intrigued. Next up, I have two palettes from Melt that I was very, very, very close to buying, and I still kind of regret not buying these. The first one is the 420 palette, which honestly, looking back, I'm like, why didn't I buy that palette? Because that is such a beautiful color story. Was there any shimmers in that? Is that why I didn't buy it? Let me take a look at the picture. I forget like exactly what this one looks like. Okay, so it does have one shimmer, and it's kind of like a goldy bronze, which isn't really my favorite, so I think that's one of the things that kept me from buying it, because if that is the only shimmer that I can have on my lid, I'm just not all about that. Like, of course I could use it with something else, but if I were to review that, like, that's basically how I would have to use it, and I just don't think that I would like the looks that I would come up with if I had to do that every time, because I just prefer having shimmers on my lid, and if I only have one shimmer in the palette that I don't really care for, I'm just not going to be all over the palette. But it is a beautiful palette, and it has a lot of really, really nice tones in it. Like, this is the kind of neutrally palette that I can get on board with, because it has some really, really fun, like, interesting, unique tones in it. And I think it is a really beautiful palette, but it just wasn't perfect. But Melt is one of those brands that really, really intrigues me, and like, I'm wearing a lot of the things from the Beetlejuice collection today. I'm wearing the lipstick as well as the eyeliner, and I really, really like a lot of things I have from Melt. So Melt is one of those brands that I feel like next year I'm probably going to jump on the Melt bandwagon a little bit more than I have, because I really, really like all of their stuff. The other palette that I almost bought from Melt as well was their Valentine's release. It's called the Millennial Pinks, I think, and I don't know, there's something about that palette that just, again, it just kind of drew me in. But I also know myself that if I had that palette, I would feel kind of restricted. There's only so many looks you could do with a color story like that. Of course, you could get like, you know, quite a few different looks, but I just feel like it wouldn't be the kind of palette that I would be super drawn to using. I also don't really like cool tone pinks that much on myself. So that combined with, you know, just the rest of the palette being a little bit limiting, I don't know. It also had a black in it though, which you guys know I love making black eyeshadow. So when there is a black in the palette, it's such a selling point for me. I know so many people hate it, but for me, I'm like, I can get this really nice and dark. But yeah, I didn't end up picking it up. I was very, very close. I definitely considered it, but Melt is also quite expensive. So it is one of those things that I am definitely more picky with the Melt palettes that I pick up than I am with, say, a brand like ColourPop. You know, even though I almost bought the Garden Variety palette, I feel like if Colourpop had come out with the Melt palette, I would have bought it because it would have been a lot cheaper. But since it was Melt and it was like $58 or something, I decided to skip on it, but I was very, very close still. There is one Natasha and Nona palette that I was so close to picking up, and this is the newest palette, the Trichrome palette. When I first saw this, I gasped a little bit, but then when I took a closer look, I was like, you know what? Even though there's a lot of mattes in this palette, and even though the multichromes look beautiful, the mattes just aren't as deep as I would like for them to be. Like, there were just a lot of very, very light mattes, and I don't really use light mattes that much. Sometimes I will use them as a transition shade, sometimes I will use it as an inner corner shade, but other than that, I'm just not really into like light mattes. I prefer mid-tone mattes and dark mattes to light mattes, and I just feel like I wouldn't use like a third of that palette, which is kind of a waste of money when it is an expensive palette like that. It was one of the $129 palettes as well, which is a lot. If it had been the like $70 price range or whatever, I think I would have bought it, but now looking back at the reviews that palette got, I don't think I would have loved it because I have so many beautiful multichromes from indie brands that were way more intense than the ones in the Natasha and Nona palette. So looking back, I think I made a good decision not buying that palette, but when it first came out, I was so drawn to it, but I'm also so happy I didn't end up buying it. Lastly, the last palette that I almost bought this year. I still don't really know at the time when this came out why I didn't buy it. I think because of the packaging, and this is the Juicy Boost palette from Colored Rain. I don't really own a lot of palettes from Colored Rain. I have one of their 6-pan palettes that I got in a mystery bag at some point, and I really like that palette. I also have some of their Vivid Pressed Pigments, like the singles, and I love those as well. So when they came out with a new palette, I was very, very interested, but the color story just wasn't, even though it was very colorful and very fun, it just wasn't perfect. I felt like there was something missing a little bit, and I also didn't like the fact that it came in like 2 different packagings. I thought that the big palette that was like just a normal palette just was a little big. I don't know what it was about it, but it was just a little bit off-putting, and then the palette that kind of came like a little book, I don't know, that just seemed very impractical to me, and I don't know, there was something about it that just, it made me not buy it, even though Colored Rain was one of those brands that I really wanted to try more of that year, and I couldn't pull the trigger on it, even though I really, really, really wanted to. Again, after seeing reviews of that palette, I'm super happy I didn't end up getting it because a lot of people said it wasn't that great, and it also didn't have like a good variety of shimmers. I do remember that. I think it only had 3 shimmers, and the shimmers didn't really like make sense with the rest of the color story in my mind. So those were the palettes that I almost bought this year. Do you guys feel like I made a good or a bad decision? I feel like overall, I don't think that I made a bad decision. Like, there's a couple of palettes here and there that I kind of wish that I picked up. I still want that Colourpop palette. I want them to come out with like beautiful magnetic palettes like that so badly because that would be so fun, and I think they would sell so well because their color stories and the palettes that they come out with are just a little bit too like neutrally and light and soft leaning for my liking. I just hope that Colourpop can like start coming out with some fun stuff again. Like, the most fun palette they've come out with recently was the collab with Raw Beauty Kristi. Like, that color story is fantastic. I really hope that we see more of that next year because I really want to buy from Colourpop, but if they keep coming out with things that I just don't really want, then it's tough to convince myself to do so. So yeah, those were all of the palettes that I almost bought this year. Like I said in the beginning of the video, this was inspired by Angelica's video, so I will of course link her video down below if you want to go check it out. Please do if you haven't already. If you're not subscribed to her, what are you doing with your life? Thank you so much for watching as always. If you want to see my Annettemas playlist, if you missed any of the videos that I've done this month, I will put it up on my screen. And if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.